Hey friends, welcome back to the Irony Shelf. Tonight, an entry from our audio archive, The Disappearance of Crispina Umberleigh by Saki. Now, prepare to examine the case of the vanished matriarch. In a first-class carriage of a train speeding toward the Balkans, across the flat, green Hungarian plain, two Britons sat in friendly, fitful conversation. They had just met in the cold, grey dawn at the frontier line, where the presiding imperial eagle takes on an extra head, and Germanic lands pass from the Hohenzollern dynasty to the Habsburg Empire, and where a probing official's nose must necessarily delve in polite and perhaps perfunctory, but always tiresome manner, into the baggage of sleep-hungry passengers. After a day's break in Vienna, the travellers by chance met again at the train side and paid one another the compliment of settling, instinctively, into the same carriage. The elder of the two had the appearance and manner of a diplomat. In truth, he was the well-connected representative of a wine business. The other was, certainly, a journalist. Neither man was talkative, and each was grateful to the other for not being talkative. That is why, from time to time, they talked. One topic of conversation naturally dominated all others. During their sojourn in Vienna, they had learned of the mysterious vanishing of a world-famous picture from the walls of the Louvre. A dramatic disappearance of that sort is sure to produce a flurry of imitations, said the journalist. It has certainly been preceded by many others, for that matter, said the wine merchant. Oh, of course there have been thefts from the Louvre before. I was thinking of the disappearance of people, rather than paintings. In particular, I was thinking of the case of my aunt, Crispina Umberleigh. I remember hearing something of the incident, said the journalist, but I was away from England at the time. I never quite knew what was actually supposed to have happened. You may hear what really happened, if you keep it in confidence, said the wine merchant. In the first place, the disappearance of Mrs. Umberleigh was not regarded by the family simply as a loss. My uncle, Edward Umberleigh, was by no means a weak individual. In the world of politics, he was a man to be reckoned with, but he was completely dominated by Crispina. Indeed, I never met anyone who was not cowed into subjugation when brought into prolonged contact with her. Some people are born to command. My aunt was born to legislate, codify, administrate, censor, and sit in judgment over the world at large. From the servants' quarters to the attic, everyone in the household came under her dictatorial sway, remaining as still as fossils trapped in a prehistoric drift. As a nephew visiting only occasionally, she affected me merely as a passing illness, disagreeable while it lasted, but without permanent effect. However, her own sons and daughters stood in terror of her. Their studies, friendships, diet, and even the way they styled their hair were all regulated by the formidable lady's will. Here the wine merchant paused for a moment, reflecting on his thoughts, before continuing. This will help you understand the total shock caused when she quietly and inexplicably vanished. It was as though St. Paul's Cathedral or the Piccadilly Hotel had disappeared in the night, leaving nothing but an empty space in its place. As far as we know, nothing was troubling her. In fact, she had much to live for. Her youngest boy had just returned from school with a disappointing report, and she was to have sat in judgment on him that very afternoon. Now, if it had been he who had vanished in a hurry, one could have supplied the motive. Furthermore, she was in the middle of a heated correspondence with the local dean, whom she had already accused of heresy and quibbling. No ordinary concern would have induced her to abandon that fight. The matter was put in the hands of the police, but it was kept out of the papers, and the generally accepted explanation of her withdrawal from her social circle was that she had been admitted to a private clinic. "And what was the immediate effect on the family?" asked the journalist. "All the girls bought themselves bicycles," replied the wine merchant wryly. The cycling craze was still at its height, and Crispina had rigidly forbidden any participation in it among the members of her household. The youngest boy rebelled to such an extent during his next school term that it resulted in his expulsion from that particular establishment. The elder boys suggested a theory that their mother might be wandering somewhere abroad, and searched for her diligently. Though it must be admitted, they looked mostly in the kind of Parisian nightclubs, where it was extremely improbable she would ever be found. "And all this while, couldn't your uncle find even the slightest clue?" "As a matter of fact," said the wine merchant thoughtfully, "he did receive some information, though I did not know of it at the time. He received a message one day, telling him that his wife had been kidnapped and smuggled out of the country. She was said to be hidden away on the Lofoten Islands, off the coast of Norway, I think it was, in comfortable surroundings and well cared for. With this information came a demand for money. A ransom of £2,000 was to be paid yearly. Failing this, she would be immediately returned to her family." The journalist was silent for a moment, and then began to laugh quietly. "It was certainly an unconventional form of ransom," he said. "If you had known my aunt," said the wine merchant, "you would only have wondered that they didn't set the figure higher. I can well imagine the temptation. Did your uncle succumb to it?" "Well, you see, he had to think of others as well as himself. For the family to have returned to Crispina's tyranny, after having tasted the delights of liberty, would have been a tragedy. But there were even wider considerations too. Since her vanishing, he had instinctively adopted a far bolder and more decisive line in public affairs, and his popularity and influence had increased accordingly. From being merely a strong man in politics, he was now spoken of as the strong man. All this, he knew, would be jeopardized if he once more receded into the mere role of Mrs. Umberleigh's husband. Here the wine merchant settled back in his seat before continuing. He was a rich man, and £2,000 a year, though not exactly a trifle, did not seem an extravagant price to pay for the boarding out of Crispina. Of course, he had severe qualms of conscience about the arrangement. Later, when he took me into his confidence, he told me that in paying the ransom, or hush money, as I should have called it, he was partly influenced by a fear. But if he refused, her safety would not necessarily be guaranteed. It was better, he reasoned, to think of her well cared for as a highly valued guest at one of the Lofoten Islands than to have her struggling home in a shattered condition. He paid the yearly installment as punctually as a fire insurance premium, and with equal promptitude an acknowledgement would arrive, stating that Crispina was cheerful and in good health. One report even mentioned that she was busying herself with a scheme to reform the local church administration, much, one might assume, to the consternation of the pastor. Another spoke of a rheumatic attack and a journey to a health spa on the mainland. On that occasion, an additional £80 was demanded, and willingly paid. It was, of course, in the interest of the kidnappers to keep their charge in good health, but the absolute secrecy they maintained gave evidence of a truly wonderful organization. If my uncle was paying a rather high price, he could at least console himself that he was paying specialists' fees. Meanwhile, had the police given up all attempts to track the missing lady? Asked the journalist. Not entirely. They came to my uncle from time to time to report on clues which they thought might shed some light on her fate or whereabouts. But I think they had their suspicions that he knew more information than he had shared with them. And then, after a disappearance of more than 8 years, Crispina returned, with dramatic suddenness, to the home she had left so mysteriously. She had escaped her captors, interjected the journalist, leaning slightly forward with an air of sharp anticipation. She had never been captured. Her wandering away was caused by a sudden and complete loss of memory. She usually dressed rather with the respectability of a head housekeeper, and it was not so surprising that she imagined herself to be one, and still less surprising that people should accept her statement and help her find work. She had wandered as far as Birmingham and found steady employment there. Her relentless energy and enthusiasm for putting people's rooms in order served to counterbalance her domineering nature. It was the shock of being patronizingly addressed as "my good woman" by a curate who was disputing with her the placement of a stove in a parish concert hall that led to the sudden restoration of her memory. "I think you forget who you are speaking to," she observed crushingly. It was a rather severe remark, considering she had only just remembered it herself. "But what of the Lofoten Island people? Who had they got hold of?" exclaimed the journalist. "A purely mythical prisoner," replied the wine merchant with a shrug. "It was an attempt, in the first place, by someone who knew the domestic situation, probably a discharged valet, to bluff a lump sum out of Edward Umberleigh before the missing woman could be found. The subsequent yearly installments were an unlooked-for windfall to the original haul. Crispina found that the 8-year interregnum had fatally undermined her domineering influence over her now grown-up children. Her husband, however, never accomplished anything great in the political world after her return. The strain of attempting to explain away an unspecified expenditure of £16,000 spread over 8 years entirely occupied his mental energies. But here is Belgrade, and another custom house. And here, dear listener, we conclude our reading of The Disappearance of Crispina Umberleigh, written by Saki and respectfully adapted for the modern listener. Saki published this story in 1911, a time of shifting borders and vanishing icons. He evokes the tension of the Austro-Hungarian and German frontiers, a labyrinth of bureaucracy where a person might easily disappear. But perhaps his most telling reference is to the theft of the Mona Lisa from the Louvre, which happened mere days before the events of this story were set in print. At the time, the world was gripped by a singular paradox. The empty space on the wall of that museum drew larger crowds than the painting ever had. Much like that vacant frame, Crispina's absence becomes her family's most valued asset. And in a final Saki-esque twist, she is restored to her family, not by a spark of maternal affection, but by a surge of aristocratic pride. The curate's use of the phrase, "my good woman," a label typically reserved for social inferiors in Edwardian England, served as a sharp reminder that she was far too important to be patronized by a junior clergyman. Now, as we bid farewell to the vanished matriarch, if you find a certain charm in these classic stories, we invite you to subscribe and join us here at the Irony Shelf. Your support allows us to continue curating these volumes for the audio archive. Thank you for listening. I look forward to sharing our next story with you very soon.